Dzień dobry Państwu, witam Państwa serdecznie.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Marcin, Waszak, and I represent Forum IDEA, the ideaForum of the Batory Foundation. This is the second day of our conference devoted to Integrity Pact and the EU results and perspectives. Yesterday, we said a couple of words about what the Pact is, how it is evaluated by institutions and companies that were engaged in implementing the Pact in Poland. Today, we'll give you a look at what was happening abroad when it comes to the Pact. We will focus on the role of citizens themselves in supervising public tenders. We'll try to focus on how to engage people, how to make citizens more interested in monitoring the spending of public funds under public tenders in the EU. We'll try to look at good practices that could be replicated in other countries. And last but not least, we will ask the question, what's next? What can be done after the Integrity Pact is over? This conference is a summary of a certain chapter. What can we do to strengthen the role of civic society when it comes to monitoring and supervision of public tenders and protection of public funds, public needs, and EU funds as well? Together with us, we have a group of outstanding guests. And without further ado, I'll immediately hand over to an introductory round. I will just for informational purposes tell you that the conference is streamed via Facebook account of the Batory Foundation in Polish, and you can also tune in the YouTube channel of the foundation to listen to it in English. Both these channels will give you the opportunity to ask questions to our panelists. My colleague will be updating the list of questions and forwarding them to me. As soon as we have any questions, I'll try to pass them to our guests. And now, without further ado, who's with us here who agreed to accept our invitation? And this is a big thank you to all the people present. Indeed, these are excellent speakers. So let me introduce to you Rafael, García, Aceves from Transparency International Secretariat. In Transparency International, Transparency International is the coordinator of Integrity Pact in Europe. In Transparency International, Rafael is responsible for public tenders policy for over a decade. He has been specializing in combating corruption as an element of public management. He was working on the concept of open government from the enterprise perspective, i.e. using data technologies and social engagement in order to improve the quality of public services and the quality of institutions. Before joining Transparency International, he was the director for open contracts in Mexico City, where he designed and tested the model for public tender planning in cooperation with the private sector and citizens. He's got a diploma from the London School of Economics. He graduated in data science in social studies. Thank you for being with us, Rafa. Now, moving on to our second guest, Dr. Mahmoud Farag, Associate Professor in the Institute of Political Studies at the University of Zurich. Mahmoud is a consultant. He's working in the field of accountability, and processes related to public procurement, as well as cooperation with citizens in that very context. Moreover, he's got over 12 years of experience when it comes to working and advising civic organizations in the field of civic engagement. as well as human rights.
Wcześniej współpracował między innymi z takimi organizacjami
Before that,
społeczeństwa
he worked
obywatelskiego jak
with
Accountable Now,
CSOs such as Accountable Now, Care International UK,
Międzynarodową
or
Organizacją do Spraw
the IMO, the International
Migracji.
Migration
Tak
Organization.
już wspomniałem, Mahmoud posiada tytuł doktora nauk
As I
politycznych,
mentioned,
który odebrał
he's
na
got
Uniwersytecie
a
Humboldta
doctoral
w
title
Berlinie.
in
Witam cię,
political
Mahmoud,
studies from the
serdecznie.
Humboldt University in Berlin. Hello, Mahmoud. Glad to have you with
Teraz
us.
przedstawię
Now
panią
let me introduce to
Katarzynę
you Madam Katarzyna Kaźmierczak.
wójt gminy Poraj.
She's the reeve
Pani
of
Katarzyna
Poraj commune.
jest z zawodu nauczycielem dyplomowanym
Katarzyna
i
is
też
a
samorządowcem
teacher
z
by
wieloletnim
profession.
stażem i bardzo dużym
She has been working
dorobkiem. Od
in the
2010
local
roku
authorities area for a long
była
time.
przewodniczącą Rady Gminy
Since
Poraj. Od
2010, he was the head
2016
of the
wicewójtem
communal
gminy Poraj,
council
a
in
w
Poraj
2019
and the
roku
deputy reeve.
wygrała
In
wybory na wójta
2019, she won the
gminy
local elections and
Poraj.
became the reeve of
Jest
Poraj
też bardzo
commune.
zaangażowana w
She's
działalność
very engaged in
porajskich organizacji i stowarzyszeń
local
społecznych. My
authorities
mieliśmy
and associations.
przyjemność poznać panią wójt
We
przy
had a
okazji
pleasure
realizacji własnego
to
monitoringu
meet her
w ramach
personally
Polskiego Paktu
when we were doing our own
Uczciwości.
monitoring under the umbrella of the
I
Polish
myślę, że
Integrity
będzie
Pact.
okazja też
I think that
na temat tego epizodu naszego projektu
we will have a
chwilę
chance
powiedzieć, bo
about
on
this
też niesie
episode,
są bardzo
if you like, of our project.
pouczające wnioski. Pani
There are many lessons
wójt, bardzo
that we
dziękuję
can
za
learn from it.
przyjęcie
Madam,
zaproszenia i
thank you
oczywiście
for
witam panią
accepting
serdecznie
our
również w
invitation.
naszym panelu.
Hello, so glad to have you
Dzień
here on the
dobry.
panel.
Chciałbym również przedstawić
Good
dr
morning.
Irinę
I would
Lonean
also
z
like to introduce to
Transparency
you Dr.
International,
Irina Lonean from Transparency International,
Rumunia, z oddziału rumuńskiego
Romania.
Transparency International. Irina jest doktorem nauk politycznych, wykształciła
He
się
has
na
a doctoral title
Uniwersytecie
in
Libre
political
de Bruxelles
studies
oraz
from
na
the
Uniwersytecie w Bukareszcie.
Université Libre
Posiada
de
też licencjat
de
prawa i
Bruxelles
stara
and the
się łączyć
Bucharest
ten
University.
swój dorobek
She's also
naukowy
got
i
a bachelor's
działalność
degree
naukową
in
właśnie
law.
z,
She's trying to combine her scientific and academic
też z działalnością
work
zawodową.
with the
Od
professional
ponad
activity.
14
For
lat
over
pracuje w
14
rumuńskich i
years, she has
międzynarodowych
been
organizacjach
working for
pozarządowych,
Romanian and international
których
NGOs.
misją i celem jest właśnie wspieranie demokracji,
His mission and goal is
praworządności,
to promote democracy, rule of
też
law,
angażowanie
and
czy zwiększanie uczestnictwa młodzieży w takiej
increasing the participation of
partycypacji
youth
obywatelskiej, a też proponowanie
civic
rozwiązań politycznych
projects.
opartych właśnie na badaniach.
The organizations she works for
Irina,
propose political solutions which
oprócz
are
tego, że ma
based on
imponujące
research. Apart from
wykształcenie, to
having
też ma
impressive
imponujący
education,
dorobek, jeśli chodzi o
Irina
prowadzenie
also
samego
has
Paktu
very impressive
Uczciwości, bo
achievements when it comes to
nadzoruje,
Integrity Pacts.
jakby zarządza aż 3 paktami
He
uczciwości, które są
manages the
prowadzone
3 Integrity
w
Pacts
Rumunii, więc na pewno też
in Romania,
ma bardzo
and
duże
I'm sure
doświadczenie w tym zakresie, którymi na pewno
she
się
has
też z nami
extensive
dzisiaj
experience that
chętnie
she'll be more than happy
podzieli.
to
Także
share
witam
with
Cię,
us today.
Irina, również dziękuję za
Hi,
przyjęcie
Irina.
zaproszenia.
Thanks for accepting our invitation.
I na koniec
And last
profesor
but
Grzegorz
not least,
Makowski,
Professor
którego
Grzegorz
znałem Państwu
Makowski.
ze wczorajszej sesji. Grzegorz był
You
wczoraj
know him from
jednym z
yesterday's session.
panelistów,
Yesterday,
a
Grzegorz was one of the
dzisiaj,
panelists.
to znaczy był moderatorem, a dzisiaj jest jednym z panelistów.
The speaker corrected himself.
Grzegorz
was yesterday our
jest
moderator
kierownikiem
now. He
Polskiego
is a
Paktu
panelist
Uczciwości,
member. He
więc
is the
głównie w tej roli dzisiaj
head of
występuje,
the
ale jest
Polish
też
Integrity Pact, so
doktorem
that's the hat that he is
habilitowanym
wearing
w
today.
socjologii,
He is
ekspertem Forum
also
Idei Fundacji
got
Batorego,
a doctoral
naukowo
title
związany
in
z kolegium
sociology. He is an expert of
ekonomiczno-społecznym
Forum
Szkoły
Idei,
Głównej
associate
Handlowej
professor in
w
the Economic
Warszawie.
and Social College of the Warsaw
Naukowo
School of
i
Economics.
też z racji pracy w Fundacji
When it
Batorego
comes to
zajmuje się
his scholarly
zagadnieniem
work and
przeciwdziałania
his engagement
korupcji,
with the Stefan
rozwojem
Batory
społeczeństwa
Foundation,
obywatelskiego
he
i
focuses on
sytuacją
anti-corruption,
organizacji
development of civic
pozarządowych. Autor
society,
bardzo
and the
wielu
situation
książek,
of NGOs.
artykułów naukowych i
He's the
tekstów
author of
publicystycznych, w tym też
numerous
poświęconych samemu
books,
paktowi.
monographs,
Witam
articles,
Cię, Grzegorz,
also
serdecznie.
devoted to the pact itself. Hi Grzegorz, glad to have you.
Bardzo się cieszę na taki skład panelu,
We are
jaki
so
mamy.
happy to
Myślę, że
have
czeka nas
such
owocne
an
2
outstanding
godziny
team of panelists. I think that's
dyskusji.
the upcoming 2 hours is going to be a feast when it comes to exchanging food for thought. And let me start by giving the floor to Mahmoud. You've prepared a presentation for this panel to briefly discuss good practices and lessons learned when it comes to working with citizens and engaging them to monitor public procurement procedures. You will be presenting your conclusions from a variety of integrity pacts carried out in Europe. You will give us a bird's eye view on what's happening in 11 member states that participated in the pilot program. So I'm sure this is going to be the crème de la crème, the most interesting elements, and you will be able to share some general conclusions with us as well. Is it easy to make people interested in public procurement? Well, that's not easily understandable for everybody, is it? And if it is doable, if it's feasible, what would be the best way to do it? What's the best route to engaging citizens, making them more willing to look at the spending of public funds? Mahmoud, the floor is yours. And now over to you. The mic is yours as well. And we ask to all the panelists try to be disciplined in terms of time. I would like you to talk for not more than 10 minutes. So Mahmoud, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Marcin, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and thanks for promoting me to an associate professor at the University of Zurich. My official title is a postdoctoral fellow, but I'm aspiring to be a professor, so it's a nice, that's nice from you. I'm going to start today by saying that citizen engagement in public contracting is different than citizen engagement in other activities. So, for example, the whole agenda of social accountability that is promoted by the World Bank it has a less focus on public contracting and more focus on the evaluation of public services that people are benefiting from, which is much more easier. So the short answer to your question, Marcin, is that citizen engagement in public contracting is difficult, but it is very promising and it is doable. And we are going to discuss today how this can be doable. I'm going to start in my next slide by arguing that there are 4 key success factors that we can distill from the experience of the many different partners as part of the Integrity Pact's Europe project that was coordinated by Transparency International and run by partners all over Europe. And my first success factor in the next slide is the project itself. So if we have the luxury to choose a project, this project has to have 3 main traits or characteristics. The first one is value. So people are more interested and are more willing to be engaged in monitoring public contracting when it concerns a project that is perceived to be valuable by them. It's not about our perception whether this is valuable or not, but it's about the perception of people. And value can mean different things. So, for example, in Italy, the project that was monitored by ActionAid Italy was the innovation of an archaeological site in Sybaris, and for the people there was a clear socio-economic value in terms of renovating this site because it would generate more tourism and get more jobs into the area. So I think thinking from the perspective of people and putting ourselves in the shoes and understanding what is perceived to be value, and in the process also asking them if this is perceived to be valuable. So when it's not perceived to be valuable, citizens tend to disengage a bit. And in Slovenia, for example, there was a very interesting project that we could all agree that it is valuable, but this wasn't perceived to be as valuable by citizens. And this was actually improving the energy system, energy reservation system of 2 hospitals in Slovenia. And for us, this is very important. This can lead to reducing emissions. This can lead to reducing expenses. But for people, this wasn't very perceived to be having direct value to them. And that's why this was one of the reasons that there wasn't a lot of engagement with this project. The second point here, which is also important, is it is very difficult to engage citizens if there is high opposition on their side to the project itself. So if people oppose the project, it doesn't make sense to actually engage them, right? And this was very clear from the experience of our partners in Latvia, who were monitoring the Riga tram project, the extension of a Riga tram project. And for them, because the Riga tram line was going through a historical graveyard, a group of citizens who were called the Graveyard Friends were actually against this project from the very start, and they were perceived, um, um, and it was very difficult for them to be engaged in a project that they're actually against it. So I think ensuring that the project that we will be monitoring is endorsed rather than opposed by citizens is very important. Going to the third point, which is visibility. Right, citizens are more interested to monitor and to be engaged in something that they can see and can actually monitor the progress over time. This is more applicable for projects that are projects and not service contracts, right? So in the project there were a number of service contracts that, for example, establishing like what was the case in Czech Republic, for example, establishing a national system in order to be able to manage EU funding. This is very interesting, but it is a system. It's an IT system. It's really difficult to monitor that. At the end, you have a final project that you will see at the end. So in a way, there's no clear process where people can actually see and monitor and be engaged. So I would say that the value, position, visibility are three important considerations that we need to take to account if we want people to be engaged in the project. Moving to in the next slide, moving to the next point, which is no citizens, no engagement, right? So if we want to engage citizens, it doesn't make sense to have engagement if we don't have citizens. But the question is, how can we get citizens to be engaged? And we can, from the experience of different partners, we can actually say there are 5 main um, uh, important building blocks that can enable citizen engagement in public contracting, and one of it is in information. From the interaction of different partners with citizens, there was clear indication that people are not very aware how public contracting is essential to their own lives. They don't know that public contracting is a process that manages how um, um, the airports that they use when they travel, the train stations, and the public transport systems that they use when they go to work every day, the roads that they use when they go um, 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 to buy their stuff, right? The hospitals and schools that they use. So public contracting affects all aspects of our lives, and it's important for people to understand that um, uh, engaging is important because this is an important process, important public process. So many of our partners have actually tried to do that, to overcome this by providing information in terms of doing information sessions, doing online ads, doing offline sessions, doing town hall meetings with citizens. So there is a lot of ways to be able to facilitate um, um, passing on information to people about how public contracting can affect their own lives. including the project that they are supposed to monitor. And second point is capacity. People are not going to be engaged if they don't have enough capacity, right? And capacity is about knowledge and skills. Public contracting is a very difficult difficult process, right? So it includes a lot of paperwork, includes a lot of legal documents. And if we want to include citizens, we want to ensure that they have the capacity. And it's about also deciding to what extent do we want them to be engaged, right? So capacity is at the end limited, right? So if we, in our partners in Italy, for example, they have designed very ambitious and interesting capacity building programs to get people to understand what is public contracting, what is anti-corruption, what is the anti-corruption law, how the public contracting process is supposed to be going according to the law, how they can actually review tender documents. So it's a long process, and it needs discussion with people how we can make this process easy, and to what extent they want to be engaged in the process. Expecting that citizens will be able to monitor a public contracting process on their own, it's a bit over ambitious, I would say. The three there are also 3 points that are somehow connected to each other. One of them is distrust, the second is empathy, and the third one is collective action. So people usually, and the data from the global corruption barometer over the years that has been telling that people have distrust in public authorities, and including in public contracting itself, in the process itself. So they don't, and this leads to people also feeling that whatever they do, if they are engaged or not, this is not going to change anything. So I think there is a role here for the Integrity Pact to play, to show that Integrity Pact actually gives you the right and gives you access to documents in order to review documents that in some cases are not accessible under the access to information law. And at the same time, Integrity Pacts, because it's a three-way process between citizens and also civil society and civil society organizations who are doing the monitoring, vis-a-vis the builders and public authorities. I think there is a good way where you can build trust via doing um, uh, by having interaction between citizens on one hand, and between the public authorities and bidders on the other hand. I think it is through this dialogue, and this is not a one-shot meeting, right? This is a process of dialogue between citizens and public authorities, through which we can build and enhance trust. And this was very clearly done with our partners in Italy, Action Aid, that has been doing these types of collective, these types of dialogue between citizens and public authorities over time, and slowly they could build build trust over time. I would say we don't have um, uh, extensive evidence, but we have anecdotal evidence that shows that people are more trustful now when they are engaged and they have an insider view of the process itself. Going to my next slide, and my third success factor, which is look in the mirror, right? So in this slide, you can. So can you please move to the next slide? Yeah, look in the mirrors, right? And this is about us as civil society, right? So the other points were about citizens and the project, but this is about us. If we want to engage citizens, we want to ensure that we have know-how, right? So citizen engagement is not organizing a meeting to tell people how this can be done. Citizen engagement is a process, and it requires a certain knowledge about how this can be done to different people in different contexts, and we have to be from the very beginning of the project to invest in that, to make sure that we have the budget to hire the right people. We have also local contexts that can facilitate our access to the community. So one example from Hungary is that via local contexts, they were able to reach out to local communities and organize activities on the ground, and which wouldn't have actually been possible without these local contexts. So it's always important to take the time to build these local contexts, to make sure that we have know-how, and at the same time to make sure that we have the budget to be able to organize these activities. In some of our partners who didn't budget for that actually found it harder towards the end of the project to be able to take activities, to undertake activities, because this wasn't actually originally budgeted. So in order to make sure that I don't exceed the 10 minutes, so I'm going to go to my last success factor in the next slide, which is fix the broken bridge, right? We need to also take into consideration that public authorities, citizen engagement is dependent also on building incentives for public authorities in order to allow and to embrace citizen engagement. This is not in the DNA of many public authorities, right? To allow citizens to look to have a look and to review what they are doing. They think that this is part of the job, and they know the job, and engaging citizens sometimes is difficult. So I think we need to think creatively about how to have some incentives that would actually lead to public authorities being more open for citizen engagement. This can take the form of making sure that citizens would sign in confidential statements saying that this information that they are reviewing as part of the project is not going to be to go beyond the project itself. This can also thinking about how we can overcome the legal obstacles to citizen engagement, right? And how to overcome also invested interest. In some cases, it is not. There might be interests that are invested interests on the part of local politicians, for example, who can be anti-citizen engagement. So thinking about that and thinking how we can work with them to overcome their fears, their mistrust. This can help with making citizen engagement work in the process, in the context of public contracting. This is a process. It's a cultural change, I would say, but it requires time and effort. But I would say it is worth it. So I'll stop here. My 10 minutes are up, and I look forward to continuing our discussion and continuing my slides in the second part of the panel.
Bardzo dziękuję, Mahmoud.
Thank you so much.
Podpisuję pod twoimi słowami,
I can only echo your words, engaging citizens in areas that are very accessible to them, so hard to get into, as public procurement is indeed a challenge. It's a process that requires time. It requires a solid foundation of trust. Also trust towards organizations that do monitoring. We, the Batory Foundation, are the best example of that. We supervised the railroad project in Poland. Initially, we had a meeting with local inhabitants that we had to cancel because nobody wanted to attend. The next attempt was 5 people, then we had 20 people, and at the very last meeting, we had a lot of people, huge interest, many questions.
To jest coś, nad czym trzeba cały czas pracować i
this shows us that what we do requires continuous effort.
Ale mimo wszystko nie warto się zrażać,
Sometimes you may fail, however you cannot get discouraged. At the end of the day, if you're visible as a social observer, if people trust you,
zwracają się do nas z różnymi problemami i
They
I to
know
jest
they can
właśnie to, o
come
co
to you
chodzi
if they
w
have
pakcie
problems.
uczciwości, żeby
This is
odpowiadać
our
na
lesson learned from
realne
our
potrzeby, na
project.
realne
This is also the crux of Integrity
problemy
Pact.
mieszkańców,
It
których
has to
ta
respond
inwestycja,
to
którą
real
monitorujemy
needs of
bezpośrednio,
local
dotyka. Także
communities,
bardzo
communities
jeszcze
that
raz
are
Mahmoud,
directly
dziękuję za to
impacted by the
spojrzenie.
investments that we are monitoring.
I teraz właśnie
Thank you very
chciałbym
much.
poprosić
Now,
Irinę
I would like to hand over to Irina.
o takie podzielenie się takim doświadczeniem
Could you share with
rumuńskim,
us
ponieważ wiem, że wy
the
też
Romanian experience?
podejmowaliście takie próby
I know that
nawiązania jakichś
you also
relacji
made attempts to
z interesariuszami waszych inwestycji,
engage
które
with
monitorowaliście.
stakeholders
Tam
of your
w waszym
investments that
przypadku to
you
byli
were
między innymi
monitoring. In
uczniowie,
your case,
nauczyciele,
these
właśnie
were
rodzice tych
students of
uczniów,
local
ale
schools,
też prowadziliście
teachers,
taką kampanię na
parents of
rzecz
these students, but you also had a campaign
rozpowszechniania
for
mechanizmu sygnalizowania w waszym
disseminating the
projekcie,
mechanism
więc
of
macie,
whistleblowing in your
że tak
project.
powiem, tutaj bogate pewnie
I'm sure you
doświadczenia
have
i wnioski
extensive
z tych
experience and
działań.
many lessons learned from your
No
activities.
też robiliście to trochę w trudnych czasach
I know
pandemicznych,
that
z
the
tego co wiem,
times were
albo
not
jak
easy.
przynajmniej
This was
próbowaliście robić, więc
a
tutaj też mnie
pandemic.
interesuje ten wątek, czy też
Therefore, I will be
w takim
also interested
czasie, który
in
no,
that
cały czas
particular
jednak mamy
aspect.
ograniczonego dystansu
The pandemic is not yet
ludzkiego,
over. We should
no
distance
coś takiego jak
ourselves from
takie bliskie
others.
relacje z obywatelami
Are
faktycznie może
close
się powieść,
relations, building
można je
close
nawiązać
ties
i
with
można też działać
citizens
wspólnie,
doable
nawet
in such a
jeżeli,
difficult
no tak jak my
time? Can
dzisiaj
we
się
act
spotykamy
together,
tylko online.
even though
Także
we can only meet online,
bardzo
like
Cię
we're
proszę,
meeting
Irina,
today, for
o taką
instance? So, Irina,
10-minutową
over to you.
wypowiedź.
Try to keep it to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction and can you hear me?
Słychać
Okay.
się, tak.
Thank you for the introduction and the questions. Mahmoud, and you already presented some positive factors and good practices on what can be done to support citizens' engagement in monitoring public procurement. The Romanian story I have, it's full of challenges, and there are lessons that we learned, and we will definitely do something different in the future based on the experience that we had. I need to present briefly what we are actually monitoring in terms of public procurement that are part of the Integrity Pacts that we monitor, because the challenge starts, as Mahmoud said, with the type of project that we are monitoring. We monitor two types of projects. The first one, it's the land registration in Romania. Romania has a problem related to the coverage of cadastre and land registration in official registers. So the first project that we monitor, it's a very large set of public procurements for land registration in Romanian villages. One of the most important challenges we had is that at the beginning of starting of the procurement process, we didn't know the villages where the land registration will be done. This is actually established throughout the procurement process itself. So it was impossible for us to identify the local communities that are directly influenced by the public procurement before having the process of tendering and the wording of the contract ended. And this made us put us in the position that we only could do public engagement with regard to monitoring how the public procurement is implemented, not to in regard to how the public procurement process it's done until the awarding of the contract. For that part of the project or the tendering and the wording part of the program, what we have done was to try to involve as much as possible non-governmental organizations and professional organizations that are interested in the process of land registration, starting with the organization of villages in Romania, that it's an organization of mayors that are very interested in having the project implemented in their villages. Organizations of public procurement specialists, organizations of engineers that work in land registration, and so on. And we engage them through consultations and meetings on how the project and the public procurement should be organized. And based on these meetings, we formulated recommendations for the Cadastre and Land Registration Agency, that it's the public contractor that we monitor, in order to improve how the contracting was done. Afterwards, after the awarding of the contract, in the first villages where the land registration was done, we did an information campaign in order to inform citizens on their rights related to the implementation of the contract. The very important challenge in that case was that we speak about pretty small villages with disadvantaged communities. So the lack of capacity, the apathy, the lack of trust in public authorities was extremely high. We encouraged people to get in touch with us several times in order to make them report any type of misconducting that they see in the land registration. We also encourage them to get directly in touch with the land registration and cadastre agency, that it's the contract authority supervising how the contracts are implemented. As the result of this, we got the land registration agency got many reports and suggestions on how things can be done better from citizens. And based on that, the cadastre agency took some measures in order to improve how they monitor the implementation of the contracts. The other type of contract that we are monitoring has other type of challenges. We are monitoring IT projects for digitalization of public services in Romania, and we have been involved in the monitoring of two contracts of this type. The first is the digitalization of cultural resources. Based on that, the Minister of Culture in Romania will organize digital expositions available on a platform that it's called culturalia.ro. And the other type of contract, or the other contract that we are monitoring in this type of digitalization of public services, is the digitalization of the school catalog or school databases. The aim of this project is to put all data related to school performance and school attendance of students on an online format that will be available for students, for their parents, for the authorities that are doing public policies in education in order to help them make better decisions. The big challenge with the IT projects is that although they are extremely interested and valorized by the society in Romania, they are not visible until they generate a final result. And because they are not visible, and because the entire process of developing a platform and digitalizing data that are now in an analogic form, it's long and not interesting for the public. We only had the option to involve the public in this process at the beginning. And what we did is that for the electronic catalog for schools, we reach out to the students' organizations in Romania, the parents' organizations in Romania, and the teachers' trade unions. And we organized meetings and debates with them on how they see best organized and put in practice this idea of having an electronic catalog. The same for the community in the cultural field. So we reach out and met and organized debates with different stakeholders in culture, with unions of different creators, with people interested in the culture in different fields or subfields in culture, on how they would like to and think that it's appropriate to organize these electronic digital expositions. And we took all this engagement from stakeholders that are affected and interested in the result of the procurements finally, and put them on the table of the contracting authorities. We compared how stakeholders view the relevance and the end result of the project to how the contracting authorities project them and planned to have them. And out of this, some minor changes came out, and it's minor because, on the other hand, we worked with the Ministry of Culture and Ministry of Education, and they already knew pretty much well what the stakeholders are expecting from them. So I think our involvement and the citizens and stakeholders involvement that we have been capable to do was to ensure that there is a trust between the stakeholders and the contracting authorities, that the contracting authorities are doing the thing that the stakeholders it's expecting for them. And from this point of view, we contributed to building trust. On the other hand, huge challenges came with the fact that all the projects that we are monitoring are delayed because of many complicated and technical issues. And the trust that we have been able to build at the beginning because of the consultations and involvement, it's lost because of the technical, hard to explain and sometimes hard to understand delays. They are in many cases justified, and we think as external independent monitors that they are not a problem in the process from the point of view of the integrity of the process. There is no corruption there, and the public interest is actually followed when prolonging a process in order to obtain a better result at the end. But the trust of the communities and the stakeholders in how things are organized when they are delayed in implementation, it's inevitably lost. And I need to say that we didn't find the solution to rebuild the trust that we achieved at the beginning of the project. And I'm very sad with that. I know that we had some good results at the end, but we have not been able to sustain them. And from this, I think there are two lessons learned that I will take with me for future integrity pacts. The first is that we have been experts in integrity and public procurement, and it was a great process of monitoring public procurement. In order to do better citizens engagement, I think in the process we need to involve more organizations, NGOs or civil society organizations that are very close to the subject, the object of the procurement. In the case of digitalization of cultural resources, cultural organizations, in the case of the e-catalog for Romanian schools, students organizations, in the case of land registration, local organizations working to do community development in small villages, in our case in Romania. I think that taking into the process local, small, but very specialized organizations that will understand better both the technical processes, but also how citizens or stakeholders interested in that area can be mobilized would be a great addition to how integrity pacts are designed at this moment. The second thing is that what Mahmoud already said, we need a process to translate the very technical things from the public procurement process into something that it's much more citizens and stakeholders friendly beyond the community that it's dealing with public procurement. And this is a process that I think together in Europe, different partners, we thought and put together. We have now a game, a board game that can be played in order to understand better how the public procurement process is working and so on. So this translation process was something that we learned in the last year, and we can, I think, use better in future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dziękuję, Irina. Troszkę
Thank you,
ale
Irina.
to nie szkodzi, ponieważ bardzo ciekawe wnioski przedstawiłaś.
It was indeed a very interesting presentation about the conclusion of your projects.
Myślę, że trzeba teraz trochę
Well,
ten wątek
we
społeczności
shall
lokalnych i to, co
focus on the notion of local communities and the subject that you mentioned, working with local organizations that can help us build trust, establish contacts with local people that we want to engage. I think that's something that worked out in the Polish project as well. We had contact with different communities. Let's face it, one of them was the community of the Poraj commune. We went there in September, and I must say, we were deeply impressed of how vivid the community life is. There were so many topics that we could discuss, meetings that were open to everybody interested. Public investments are discussed. There are meetings devoted to them, organized by Madam Mayor. I think this is a very good area to make people interested in Integrity Pact. Therefore, my question to you, madam, could you share with us your experience? Would you say that interest in the very public tender or public procurement, irrespective whether that's project that is only pursued in one commune or in more communes, would you say it's something that comes naturally? Is it high? Or perhaps it's the commune that should address its citizens and provide information proactively. Could you give us your perspective? You're a member of local authorities. Could you give us your take when it comes to working closely with citizens and ensuring that there are no irregularities when it comes to public investments, no problems, no difficulties? Over to you, madam. Katarzyna Kaźmierczak is with us.
Dzień dobry raz jeszcze, witam wszystkich panelistów. Dziękuję serdecznie za zaproszenie Fundacji Batorego, panu Marcinowi Waszakowi, bo moja obecność na tej telekonferencji jest w zasadzie przypadkowa, a wyniknęła z faktu, że gmina Poraj stała się w cudzysłowie beneficjentem problemu, jaki pojawił się w trakcie realizacji inwestycji polskiej kolei państwowych PLK na odcinku Częstochowa-Zawiercie. Ja chciałabym powiedzieć o czymś, czego dotknęłam w tej swojej niedługiej karierze samorządowca jako włodarza, czyli kontroli społecznej. Nie powiem niczego nowego, jeżeli powiem, że ta kontrola dzieli się na taką niezorganizowaną i zorganizowaną, albo może odwrotnie, zorganizowaną i niezorganizowaną. Na poziomie samorządu tę kontrolę zorganizowaną sprawują przede wszystkim rady gminy.
The controlled part of it is done mostly by the
właściwie
councillors of the
z
communal
mojego
council.
doświadczenia nie wynika, żeby kiedykolwiek zaangażowały się w to
Based on my
organizacje,
experience,
pomijam
I
oczywiście tutaj
never had a
zaangażowanie
situation
Fundacji
when
Batorego, o którym będę dalej jeszcze
organizations would be
powiedzieć.
engaged in that. The Batory Foundation is an exception, and I will return to that later on.
Jeśli chodzi o kontrolę
When
niezorganizowaną,
it
czyli taką
comes
powiedzmy sobie
to
spontaniczną, realizowaną
spontaneous
przez pojedynczych
forms
obywateli
of
albo przez grupy obywateli,
activities pursued
to
by
ona jest
groups of
umocowana w
citizens or
przepisach,
individual
instytucją
citizens.
skargi
It's
wniosku.
rooted in
Natomiast
the
w
official
praktyce
institution of
realizuje się
complaints that each citizen
troszeczkę
can
inaczej.
lodge.
Myślę, że nie
In
będzie
practice,
to
however,
dla
social control has
Państwa
a variety of
zaskoczeniem, jeżeli
faces.
powiem,
It will not be a
że
surprise for you
realizuje
if
się
I
głównie
say that
przez, a
social
może inaczej,
control
zaczyna
is
się
done
głównie przez media społecznościowe, ale o tym powiem za chwileczkę.
usually
Chciałabym też
via
położyć pewien
social
nacisk i
media.
od tego
I'll return
zacznę
to that in
na
a second.
tą kontrolę
I
zorganizowaną,
would like to
czyli konkretnie działalność Rady Radnych, do czego nas się
start
sprowadza,
by
jeśli
the
chodzi o
operations of our
inwestycje
council, of
wewnętrzne,
what we
gminne, no bo jest
do
to praktyka
in terms
jakby
of
życia codziennego. Radni interesują
communal
się zwłaszcza
investments.
w
This is
swoich
our everyday
okręgach,
bread. Our councillors are
co
interested
się
in
będzie działo,
what
jak się
is
będzie działo, jak będzie
happening,
realizowana jakaś
what
inwestycja,
will be
chociaż w
pursued,
ciągu tych
investments that will be
3
done,
lat
etc., etc. During my
mojej
3 years of
kariery wójta
tenure
tych inwestycji
as a
było
mayor
stosunkowo
in
niewiele.
Poraj, we didn't have that many
Natomiast
investments,
bacznie
frankly
przypatrują
speaking.
się też
However,
radni
councillors are
inwestycjom
also taking a very
zewnętrznym
close look at
i
external
to się odbywa
investments,
trochę na zasadzie sprawdzam, czyli
and it's a kind
w
of
jakim
I'm
stopniu
checking your
wójt,
bluff thing.
urząd
In other
interesuje się tymi
words, to what
inwestycjami,
extent is
jaką ma
the
wiedzę na
mayor,
temat ich
to what extent
realizacji,
are
na
the
temat
authorities
terminowości
interested in
prac,
investments? Are they up to date when
ewentualnych
it comes to the timeline
nieprawidłowości.
of works and irregularities,
Trzeba dodać, że w
shortcomes
ostatnim
that might occur?
okresie, w tym okresie 3 lat,
Importantly,
gmina
in the
Poraj
last 3
była
years,
wielkim placem budowy i
Poraj
to wszystko
commune was a
były 3
huge construction
zewnętrzne,
site
spore,
done by
wielkie inwestycje. To była przebudowa
under
drogi
3 huge
wojewódzkiej,
projects, reconstruction of the provincial
która
road
przechodzi przez 3
that
miejscowości naszej
runs
gminy.
through 3
To była
localities belonging to our
modernizacja
commune.
drogi
The second one
powiatowej
was
i to
modernization
wreszcie
of
była
district
wspomniana
road. And
inwestycja
thirdly,
kolejowa,
the investment that you
modernizacja linii
mentioned, the
kolejowej
railroad
odcinku
investment, modernization of
Częstochowa-Zawiercie.
railroad line from Częstochowa to
To
Zawiercie.
oznaczało czasowe wyłączenia
That meant
z ruchu, to
temporary
oznaczało komplikacje w
closures
dojazdach do
of
posesji, do
roads,
konkretnych miejscowości.
complications
No i
when
to
it comes to
jakby,
getting to
no nie
specific
powiem, że wymusiło,
localities,
bo
people
myśmy
having
te
problem to get to their
kontakty z
houses, etc.
inwestorami i z
And
wykonawcami
well,
stale prowadzili.
naturally, we were in
Natomiast
close contact with the
jakby
contractors and
spowodowało
companies,
zintensyfikowanie
but
tych kontaktów. No ja po prostu nie mogłam nie
the
znać,
contacts intensified simply,
bez
if I can
przesady,
say
na
it so
pytanie
bluntly.
mieszkańca, czy grupy mieszkańców, czy
I
rady, co się dzieje, co
simply
się
had
będzie
to
działo, no ale
be
jakby tutaj
very up to speed,
wolałam powiedzieć.
very much up to speed.
Natomiast ta kontrola niezorganizowana,
The
niesformalizowana, o której powiedziałam, że
non-formalized
zaczyna się w
social
mediach
control that
społecznościowych,
I
i
mentioned
tak
that
było w tym
starts in
przypadku,
social media was precisely what we
dotyczyła w
experienced.
dużej mierze
It
tej właśnie inwestycji kolejowej.
mostly concerned the third investment
Tak
that I
pozwolę sobie
mentioned,
może
so
na
the
taką
railroad
małą
one.
dygresję, że od jakiegoś czasu z dużym zadowoleniem,
And
może jeszcze nie z
indeed,
satysfakcją, ale z zadowoleniem obserwuję, że ta
for
aktywność
some
w
time,
mediach
I've been
społecznościowych
observing
nie
that
sprowadza się
activity
wyłącznie
level in
do
social media is not
krytyki,
only about
czy wręcz
criticism
hejtu, który jest jakby w tej chwili
or, I
naszą
would say,
niestety
hate.
normalnością, że
It's
zaczyna
become
mieć
commonplace in many areas, but
takie
there is a light in the
walory
tunnel.
obywatelskiej troski. I tak
There
było w
is some
przypadku tej
social
właśnie
care, if I could call
inwestycji
it that way, and
realizowanej
that was
przez
precisely the case
polski,
with this
PKP, Polskie
investment
Linie
carried
Kolejowe,
out by the
prace na
Polish
linii
Railroad
kolejowej
Company,
numer 1 na odcinku
PKP,
Częstochowa-Zawiercie.
railroad section
Mieszkańców
Częstochowa to
niepokoiło
Zawiercie.
zarówno tempo robót, usterki, to był taki efekt
Citizens were worried
uboczny
with the
prowadzonych
pace of
prac,
work, some
na
small
przykład zbudowanie
damages and
kabla
failures that were
ściślającego,
a side effect of
centrum
the works being carried
przesiadkowe,
out.
ale
For
też
instance, the fact that one
zagrożenie
cable was damaged. However,
dokończeniem
people
w
were also
odpowiednim
concerned with the
standardzie,
fact
tak bym tutaj powiedziała,
that
tej
the project
inwestycji w
might not be
zakresie przede
completed
wszystkim
in
przejść
time on
podziemnych
the right
w
level,
dwóch
especially when
miejscowościach,
it came
miejscowości
to
Poraj i
underground
miejscowości
passages into
Żarki
localities
Letnisko.
Poraj and Żarki Letnisko.
I teraz powiem tak, skorelowanie wpisów
And
internetowych z indywidualnym zaangażowaniem radnych, z
engagement
moim
of
zaangażowaniem, które
councillors,
było
my
oczywiste,
personal engagement,
zbiegło się dla nas
which is
niespodziewanie w
all too
czasie
obvious, coincided
z działaniami Fundacji Batorego,
with the
z tym
operations of
testowaniem Paktu
Batory
Przyszłości na tak
Foundation,
ważnej dla nas
testing
inwestycji.
the
Nie od razu jakby
Integrity
odpowiedzieliśmy,
Pact.
że
And our
nie
investment, so
zostaliśmy sami z
important
tą
to
naszą
us, was
troską
the testing
i
field, which
że
was a sort
ktoś
of
jeszcze
consolation for
ten
us.
temat
We knew that we
prześwietlił.
are not alone, that there
To
is somebody else
spotkanie, o którym mówił pan
looking
Marcin
through the
16
topic.
bodaj
The
września
meeting that Marcin mentioned, if my
2021
memory
roku
doesn't
w
fail
budynku
me, it took
naszego
place on the
dworca
16th of September at
było
our local
dla
train
mnie
station.
osobiście bardzo ważne, bo
For me,
jakby
that was
pokazało
a meeting of
obywatelom,
paramount
że ich
importance.
czujność nie ma
It
sprawy,
showed
że
to the
nie
citizens
jesteśmy
that
jakby
there
sami
is
z
some
tym
agency in
problemem,
what
który
they're doing,
teoretycznie
that they are
nas
not
nie
left
dotyczy, bo to nie
alone.
jest nasza inwestycja.
Theoretically, one might say it's not your investment, why care
Na to się
about
jeszcze
it?
przełożyło takie przekonanie, że aktywnie spełniać mandat radnego i że to tak naprawdę jest
And my
ogromna
fellow
pomoc
councillors
dla
felt that we need to be
władzy
active in our
wykonawczej.
roles.
Ja nie wiem do końca, czy my jesteśmy w stanie wypracować taki
On the
model,
whole,
taki
however,
standard
I'm not so sure whether we are able to work out a
tej
model
kontroli
or a
zewnętrznej,
standard
tej
for
kontroli
external
obywatelskiej, czy tego
social control,
zaangażowania obywateli.
a
Ja
level of
ucząc
civic engagement.
przez grubo ponad 20 lat, nie tylko
I
historii,
have
również wiedzy
been
o
a teacher of
społeczeństwie, zawsze
history for over 2 decades. I taught
przekonana, zawsze
history, but
kładłam na to
also
nacisk, żeby uświadomić młodzieży, czym jest
political and
właśnie
social
zaangażowanie
studies for
obywatelskie,
teenagers. And I was
czym
always
jest
trying to
postawa
emphasize to my
obywatelska. Nie
fellow
jestem
students
pewna, czy
what
to się do końca
civic
udało,
engagement
bo
is,
w
what
tym
civic
mamy
attitude
w
is, what
Polsce,
citizenship
a szczególnie
means.
my
I'm
włodarze
not
w
sure whether
samorządach cały
that's
czas
working out
pewien
in
problem.
Poland. We as
Z jednej strony
representatives
jest
of
to, o czym
local
mówił
authorities are still
pan doktor Farag,
struggling with it.
że to
On
nie
the
jest
one hand,
DNA włodarzy.
I agree with what Mahmoud said. It's not in the
Zaangażowanie,
DNA of
jakkolwiek to
many
zabrzmi,
local
czyli włączanie
authorities.
obywateli
Engaging people
to działanie obywatelskie, w
in
tą kontrolę obywatelskie.
social
Dlatego
control and
bardzo
civic
jestem
control is not
ciekawa tego
something
wątku,
that we
co
do
się rozwinie,
automatically.
ten
That's
wątek
why I'm
tych
particularly
zachęt
interested
dla
in the
włodarzy, dla
incentives
samorządowców, żeby jakby
for
bardziej
local authorities
dbali o
to make
pielęgnowanie tych
sure that
postaw obywatelskich.
they take good care of
My,
civic attitudes, of
włodarze
civic
w
engagement
jednostkach
in their
samorządu
local
terytorialnego w Polsce
communities.
jesteśmy
In
permanentnie
Poland,
kontrolowani z zewnątrz.
we
Też
as
musimy o
local
tym
authorities, we
pamiętać.
are under
W
permanent
ostatnim
external
okresie
control.
więcej
Let's
jest
not
tych
forget
kontroli
about
z
it.
interwencji.
Especially
W
recently,
ostatnim okresie
we've had
najmniej sięgającym wstecz, tylko kilkuletnim jakby już
a
cyklu.
number of
To są
supervision
bardzo
and
często kontrole
controls.
interwencyjne, to są kontrole, no jakby je nie nazwał, niespodziewane.
They are
Więc
that ad hoc.
ten
They come as a
obywatelski
surprise.
monitoring jest jakby dla nas
Civic
pewnym
monitoring
dodatkowym
for
tutaj
us is a
elementem,
form
ale
of
w moim przekonaniu,
additional
zwłaszcza
puzzle. But
po obserwowaniu, jak to działanie Fundacji Batorego się rozwija i po tym, co przeczytałam na
based on
temat
what I
Paktu
saw when it comes to
Przyszłości,
the activities of
chociaż jest to
Batory
proces na
Foundation
pewno
and based on what I
długotrwały,
read about the Integrity Pact,
to
I
przy
know that
budowaniu
even though the
społeczności,
process
społeczeństwa
is
obywatelskiego
long-lasting,
wzrastająco.
however, when it comes to
Ja
building
nie wiem, czy
civic
ja do
engagement, it is a
końca
condition
w taki
sine qua
sposób,
non.
w jaki Państwo z Fundacji Batorego chcieliście,
I'm
jakby to
not
swoje
sure
stanowisko
whether
przedstawiłam, ale nawiązując
I
jeszcze raz do
presented
wypowiedzi
my
pana doktora
experience from exactly the angle that
Faraga,
you were asking me about, but to
to,
return to
co
what
jest
the
widoczne
first
przez
speaker said today,
organizacje
what is
pozarządowe
visible
z pozycji ptaka, no ja
from
oceniam po
a
prostu
bird's eye
z lotu ptaka, ja
perspective
oceniam z pozycji
can
żaby.
be seen by me
Mam
from the
nadzieję, że nie
position of a frog.
przekroczyłam czasu
And I
10
hope I
minut.
have not exceeded my time limit of 10 minutes.
Absolutnie nie przekroczyła Pani perfekcyjnie
No,
timing,
not at all. Your spot on when
Treść
it comes
wypowiedzi
to
równie
timing, and
interesująca.
also the
Wydaje mi się,
topics
nie
that you
chcę uniknąć
mentioned in
tego,
your
żebym tutaj
presentation were particularly
żadnej
important.
tajemnicy nie zdradzę trochę we własnym
It
stosie
will not
wśród
come
iluś
as a
lat
secret
ściślimy, już mamy
to
podobne
you.
przemyślenia ze
We
sobą i wiele razy na ten temat dyskutowaliśmy, a
are among
spostrzeżenie osoby,
like-minded
która jest
people.
totalnie jakby z
Birds of a feather
zewnątrz i
stick
tylko na
together, as
chwilę
they
jakby
say. So
wskoczyła
an
w te
external
tryby
perspective
paktu
is always
uczciwości, no to
most
tutaj nam
welcome.
bardzo też
You have
dużo
jumped
daje jakby
into the world of the
cennej
Integrity
informacji
Pact for a
zwrotnej.
second, and you're also valuable feedback for
Właśnie
us
w jaki sposób ten pakt uczciwości można dalej
on
rozwijać, tak?
how
I
to
co się
develop,
faktycznie
how to
przydaje
improve
też
the Integrity Pact, and
na
whether
przykład
it's
zwłaszcza
really
samorządowcom
useful, for
czy
instance,
radnym. Także
for
jeszcze
local
raz bardzo
authorities
Pani
or local
dziękuję.
councillors.
I
So once
chciałbym
again,
przejść
thank
teraz
you very
do
much, madam. Now,
Rafaela García
let me
Acevesa
hand over to Rafael.
I zapytać, no
And
właśnie trochę też w nawiązaniu do tej poprzedniej wypowiedzi
well,
pani
to
Wód, która
refer to
mówiła o
what was said by your speaker,
wypracowaniu czy
Madam
potrzebie wypracowania
Kaźmierczak,
pewnych
she was
standardów
talking
kontroli
about the
społecznej.
need of social
Mam
control.
wrażenie, że znaczy tak się spodziewam, że po tym pilotażu Paktu
I
Uczciwości, który
assume
właśnie
that
dobiega
after the
końca, jednak możemy
pilot
się
project
spodziewać, że
of
jakieś
Integrity Pact that is coming to
standardy,
its
które
end
też
right now,
zostaną,
we can
że tak
expect
powiem,
that certain
wprowadzone do prawa,
standards
tak?
will be
Zarówno
worked out and
tutaj
implemented
mam
into
nadzieję na
the
ruch ze
law.
strony Komisji Europejskiej, jak i
I hope
poszczególne
for some
kraje
initiative of the
członkowskie. Mam
European
nadzieję, że
Commission, but
rozważą to,
also on the side of member
aby
states.
pewne
I hope that member
elementy
states will
monitoringu
take
społecznego w
into
ramach
consideration
właśnie
implementation of
realizacji
certain
szczególnie
elements of
istotnych
social
społecznie zamówień
monitoring
publicznych
into
uwzględnić również
public
jakby
procurement
w
projects that
prawie,
are
czy
of
chociażby
particular
w jakichś takich
importance.
formalnych wytycznych, które by były też taką,
Such standards
no
should
tak
be
jak to
included
pani
in the
Wód ujęła,
law or
zachętą
should
do
take
tego,
the
żeby
form of
te swoje, nie wiem,
in
kontakty z
guidelines
obywatelami na
that
tym polu
might
właśnie
be an
rozwijać. I
incentive
teraz jest
for local
pytanie
authorities
do
to
ciebie, czy,
engage in that, to develop this
czy widzisz na to
engagement,
szansę,
as
żeby
Madam
faktycznie
Kaźmierczak
takie regulacje
mentioned.
zostały
Rafael,
wprowadzone, czy one są
do
potrzebne,
you
bo
see any chance of
jeśli
such
chodzi na przykład o
regulations being
polski pakt, no to
implemented?
my
Are they
się opieraliśmy w
needed?
dużej mierze na
When
dobrej
it comes to the
woli
Polish
naszych
pact, this
partnerów. Na
was
przykład
based on
to, że
goodwill of our
mogliśmy
partners.
uczestniczyć w komisji
The fact
przetargowej,
that
to
we
była
were
dobra wola
able
partnerów, bo
to
to nigdzie w prawie nie
participate in the
zostało
operations of the tender
zapisane, ale
committee,
na
this
przykład
was
wiem, że w
just goodwill
Rumunii
of
no,
our
jakby to było
partners.
bardziej restrykcyjne
It was never
i jeżeli
included
coś nie
in
jest
the
w prawie, no
law.
to jest
We know
jest
that in the
niedopuszczalne, więc to też była
Romanian
jakaś taka
case, it was
bariera,
much more
jakby
strict. If
nie
something is
obecność tego
not in
paktu
the law,
uczciwości
it
w
is
jakichś
not
takich oficjalnych
admissible.
dokumentach
The Integrity Pact
rządowych
was
było
not
też taką barierą przed właśnie
present in official
jego
government
swobodną
documents, which was
realizacją i
a barrier
rozwijaniem też tych
against
kontaktów
its
ze
implementation,
społeczeństwem
against
obywatelskim, więc
developing contacts with
co
civic
sobie obiecujesz
society.
Po tym pilotażu Paktu
What
Uczciwości? Czy faktycznie
can you promise
jest
to
realna szansa
yourself
na to,
after
żeby
this
on był
pilot
takim już
project? Is there a
stałym,
real
regularnym
chance that
mechanizmem
Integrity Pact
ochrony
will
środków
become
publicznych przed
a
nadużyciami
regular
w
mechanism of
państwach Unii
protecting
Europejskiej?
public funds against abuse and misappropriation in member states?
Great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's been great hearing from all of you all these learnings, and thank you, Marcin, for this very provocative question on the possibility of turning integrity pacts or other forms of civic engagement and monitoring of public contracting into the law, into regulation. And if I have to be very straightforward and direct, I think that we have still a very long way to get to that point. And this for me is also a little bit perplexing and challenging, considering that in the European Union, the size of public contracting it's extremely high. It can reach to 12 to 15% overall of the EU GDP, and in some of the EU member states, the size of public contracting actually reaches up to 20%, 17%, and that is a lot of money, a lot of resources. And even though that it is true, as Mayor Katarzyna was mentioning, that there are many structures and mechanisms to supervise public contracting, the truth is that these mechanisms are right now constrained to or under control only from government authorities. And this is the reason why I think it is still uncertain, and we have a long path to go. Oversight and monitoring, as currently, they are only seen as a government prerogative. And what I mean by this is that authorities are the ones who decide what, who, and how to monitor rather than taxpayers and citizens. Something that we have observed right now, after being analyzing the experience of the 18 APs monitoring 46 public contracting procedures, is that there is still a lot to do, a lot of convincing. We still need to create the case to set the foundations to have more decentralized and open oversight of public contracting. We still have this very long way to bring citizens into this process, and also to convince authorities and let them, and I mean, how to say it in a polite way. We need to convince authorities and also the leaders of government, those that are in power, that the prerogative or the decision to monitor public contracting has to come from citizens and taxpayers as well. It should not only be a decision or a prerogative from the governments themselves. And for doing that, we still need to go a long path to turn this public demand into something that is at the top of the public agenda. The communities that are affected by these projects must have a possibility, they must have a say on to decide how to enhance controls and monitoring of the projects that will be affecting their own lives, the public services that they received. So I think that the Integrity Pact's EU project has been helpful to understand where are we standing and what are the challenges that we are facing ahead. I think there are two different paths that definitely we can follow. One is exploring the EU regulation, and for that we need to we have had a great partner with the European Commission, but we still need to engage with other authorities within the European scope. We need to talk more to the European Parliament, to those representative of the different member states in the Parliament. We need to talk to other different authorities, the Council, the Supreme auditing institution of the European Union. We need to talk to those who are doing control and oversight, and we need to convince them and see what are the different paths that we have to make citizen monitoring and integrity pacts a more regular practice across the European Union. We have the European semester that happens on a regular basis, and we need to identify who are the authorities that are carrying out this process and see how do they also bring or suggest to the member states that they incorporate these kind of mechanisms into the recommendations. The common provisions regulation, which are the mechanisms that regulate how the European funds are spent, should also contemplate this kind of mechanism. So far, even though they have been recently adjusted, they do not consider or contemplate any form of direct citizen monitoring or engagement. For the last, we could say, 5 years, we have seen that there has been a great push from the European authorities to enhance and strengthen oversight and control. And for that, we have the new European public prosecutor, and they have also improved how to say the tools and the resources that have authorities such as Olaf, and they have focused very much on strengthening their own capacities and enlarging the the, the oversight mechanisms that are formal and that are led by government, but they have left aside citizens and civil society. And considering the size of public contracting in the European Union, I think it would be extremely helpful to broaden the scope and allow citizens and civil society organizations to become a more regular actor in the monitoring of these public contracts. And then I would say that in the national level, there is also as well a great scope of possibilities. And for that, we need to do more and more convincing of the local authorities, both local and national authorities in all member states, to create these paths and to explore where Integrity Pacts can be embedded. Integrity Pacts or also any other form of civic monitoring. Something that we have observed through the Integrity Pacts EU project is that the Integrity Pact works way better when it is embedded in the projects that have some strategic value for citizens or for the country. So when I have been reviewing the different Integrity Pacts, I have found that those that were linked to, for example, public services such as transportation, or as Irina was mentioning, like to a service that is very important, like land registration, having your ownership rights well defined. Those are the ones who have taken more or that have had more impact and that have had more traction. So we also need to keep finding those projects that are in need of additional oversight and monitoring, and make the case to have an Integrity Pact and citizens involved in monitoring these projects and making sure that they are executed from planning to implementation with robust oversight in order to prevent corruption, to maximize competition, and to make sure that they are in the end in line with the common interest. And I think that it will be only if we keep doing Integrity Pacts recurrently, if we keep making the case to have them embedded where they matter, that in the long term we're gonna be able to have them embedded into the law or into national or EU regulation. It is about making sure that this practice becomes something more regular, and that later it can be recognized and acknowledged as a formal mechanism that have to continue and remain as part of the architecture of regulation and controls that we have. I think that the Mayor Katarzyna makes a very good point by saying that sometimes it feels that it's more of a burden, that governments are not very convinced. But the reason why we still have that perception when we say like we need to add more monitoring probably is because we still need to do more public communication and public convincing of the value of bringing citizens into the equation. Yes, it is possible. There is a possibility that the project might actually be a little bit slower when you are bringing citizens into the equation, but also you're going to have more possibilities to uncover things that could be going wrong and correct it in time before it is too late. So I think that the Integrity Pact EU project has shown us many of the different challenges, but also many of the benefits that can be observed when you bring citizens and civil society organizations into the monitoring and into the equation. So I wish I could be more optimistic about seeing the Integrity Pact and other mechanisms embedded faster in the regulation, but I think we still have to do a lot of convincing and a lot of work to show the value and keep insisting and finding those politicians, those governments that are willing to do the things right, that they are willing to try a more decentralized and open way of control with citizens, and showcase how the contribution of citizens can improve the outcome of public contracting projects.
Dziękuję Ci, Rafa. Absolutnie się z Tobą
Thank
zgadzam,
you,
że
Rafa.
presja
Couldn't
ma
agree
sens
more.
i my jako
Pressure
organizator
makes sense
zaangażowany w ten pilotaż paktu uczciwości też
as
musimy dawać świadectwo
organizations
tego, że
engaged
może
in
ten
the
pilotaż
Integrity
faktycznie
Pact, we
przynieść
have to
dobre
be a role model.
owoce, jeśli chodzi
We have to
właśnie
show
na
people
różnych polach,
that
na
the
polu
pact
zaangażowania
brings
obywateli,
good
na polu
fruit in
przepływu
various
informacji, na polu
levels,
właśnie
information
mniejszego
flow,
ryzyka
social
nieprawidłowości
engagement,
i
decreasing the
wtedy
risk of
może
irregularities,
faktycznie
etc.
przynieść też rezultaty w postaci
This will definitely bring
zmian prawa,
tangible
na które wydaje mi się, wszyscy
effects,
tutaj
for
czekamy.
instance, changes of the legal
I
framework.
ostatnim
That's something
naszym
that we are all
mówcą w tej
waiting
części
currently.
będzie Grzegorz
Last but
Makowski,
not least, Grzegorz Makowski,
który no, Zadając pytanie Grzegorzowi, chciałbym tutaj się odwołać oczywiście do naszego wspólnego doświadczenia
Asking
z Paktem
my questions, I would like to
Uczciwości, a konkretnie
refer to
tego
our
doświadczenia,
joint
które
experience
dotyczy
related to the
naszych
Integrity
kontaktów z
Pact,
przedstawicielami
specifically
samorządu.
our contact with
Mieliśmy
representatives
na
of
koniec
local
dosłownie
governments and
pilotażu
authority.
takie rozmowy właśnie z tym
Towards the
środowiskiem
very
i
end
przekonaliśmy
of
się, że
the
jest
project, we had a
pewne
chance to talk to
pole,
these people, and we
a nawet i oczekiwanie ze
concluded
strony właśnie czy to radnych,
there is a certain level of
właśnie
expectations
przedstawicieli
on the side of
samorządu,
local
żeby ten
council
pakt
members,
uczciwości zaistniał na tym poziomie
local
lokalnym, bo na
officials to
przykład
have the
jest
Integrity
problem
Pact present on the local
z
level.
zamówieniem czy z ceną
Just to
na
give you
usługi
an
dotyczące wywozu
example,
śmieci. Taki przykład się pojawił u nas w Pakcie
prices
Uczciwości i pytanie od
for
razu, czy Pakt Uczciwości może temu w jakiś sposób
picking
zaradzić,
up
czy może, nie
waste
wiem,
for
pomóc przekonać
detached and
więcej
semi-detached
wykonawców do tego,
houses.
żeby
And the question
przetargu
arose, can
ta dyskusja
Integrity
była,
Pact
albo
help
czy
here?
może obniżyć
Would it be a way to
jakaś cenę tej usługi, czy
encourage
to, że
more
tam
companies to
dyrektorzy będą
participate in the
pilnowali,
tender?
żeby nie
Perhaps the
dochodziło do
price could be
marnotrawstwa środków i
lowered
tak
if
dalej.
there's social control,
Więc to
ensuring
jest
that there is no
jakiś
wasting
sygnał
of money.
właśnie stąd,
For
że
us, it's a
można
clear
i nawet
signal.
chyba należy przetestować Pakt Uczciwości na
We
poziomie
can and we
samorządu.
should
Pytanie,
test
czy ty widzisz to
the
też w
Integrity
takiej
Pact
formule,
at the local
jakiej my to
level.
testowaliśmy, czy
Grzegorz, do
jednak
you
te
also
wszystkie
see it
jakieś
under the
takie
formula that we
obostrzenia i
tested?
bariery też biurokratyczne, o
In
których
other
pani
words,
wójt wspomniała,
red tape barriers
no,
that Madame
powinny nas moim zdaniem
Kaźmierczak
szukać
mentioned
innej, może prostszej formuły
should
Paktu Uczciwości właśnie dla
stimulate us
potrzeb
to look for a
inwestycji lokalnych.
simpler formula of
Grzegorz.
integrity pacts for local investments. Over to you.
Dziękuję i zanim odpowiem na to
Thank you.
pytanie, to
Before
że tak
I
powiem, siedzę w
answer
tym,
your question,
to może sobie
let
pozwolę
me
też,
say that
zachęcając może pozostałych
I'll give my own
uczestników do
perspective. I
odniesienia
hope
się do
that
tego,
this
co
will
powiem,
be a
nie
word
tylko
of
się
encouragement for
między
other
sobą, to
panelists
bym
to
zaczął
reflect upon
może
my
trochę
words.
też od jakby uwypuklenia paru wątków, które
Hence,
tu
let
padły
me start by amplifying and underscoring
poprzedniczek.
certain topics that were mentioned by my four
Po
speakers.
pierwsze, ja jeszcze raz chcę podziękować pani
First of
wójt,
all, once again,
że
let me
nas
thank you, Madam Mayor,
zaszczyciła obecnością
for honoring
jestem
us with
bardzo
your
daleki od
presence.
takiego stwierdzenia, że to jest
I'm
obecność przypadkowa,
really
w tym
far
sensie
away from stating
przypadkowa, że
that
myśmy
you're here accidentally.
na końcu pilotażu się spotkali, więc
Well, the only
element
coincidence that I can
przypadkowości
think of
jest,
is that we met only
ale
at
mając
on the last
możliwość
mile of our
poznania nieco pani wójt
pilot
i też
project.
wysłuchania
But
tego, co pani
now,
tutaj powiedziała, to wydaje mi się, że pani
after what you've
obecność na
said,
takim
I think
wydarzeniu
that your
jest
presence
zupełnie
on
nieprzypadkowa.
such a
No,
panel
myślę, że
is
gdybyśmy
no
mieli,
coincidence at all.
to co prawda tylko 50 kilometrów tej linii, którą żeśmy
It's
monitorowali, ale
only
gdybyśmy
50
mieli
kilometers stretch
więcej
of the
takich
railroad line that
wójtów
we
jak pani,
monitored.
takich
If we had
włodarzy i
more
też
mayors
radnych,
like
którzy pani
you, more
zamieniłem,
councillors
też się
like the ones
zaangażowali
from your
bardzo
communal
mocno
council that
w
really
temat,
got engaged
no
heavily in the topic,
to byśmy pewnie mieli ten taki element mobilizacji
we
oddolnej
would
tutaj dużo
have
bardziej
a stronger
rozwinięty.
element of bottom-up
Ja też nie mówię tego też w takim sensie, że
mobilization.
po prostu po drugiej stronie nikogo nie było,
I'm
bo
not saying that there
zawsze
was
się okazuje,
no
żeśmy nie
other
znaleźli jakiegoś klucza,
person on the other
żeby
side.
docierać
Perhaps we didn't find the right
do
key to
odpowiednich
really
osób. Natomiast
get to the
wydaje
right
mi się,
people.
że, no, że to jest jednak bardzo ważne, żebyśmy się
I think
potrafili
it's
spotykać w odpowiednich
so important
momentach.
for us to
Nie
be
mówię tylko
able
tu
to
o
meet
fundacji, która z
at the right
Warszawy
moments in
jeździła
time.
te
I'm not only
kilkanaście
speaking of
kilometrów
representatives of the
miejsca
Batory
realizacji
Foundation who would
inwestycji, ale
cover several
również
hundred
mówimy o tym
kilometers
poziomie
to arrive
lokalnym,
at the
jak i
place where the investment
zaangażowaniu
was being
lokalnych
implemented, but
organizacji,
also in terms of engaging
obywateli,
local
społeczności
authorities,
w
citizens,
patrzenie
local
na rzeczywiście,
community,
jak są wydawane pieniądze
making
publiczne.
sure that
Mówię
they
też w tym
supervise the
wymiarze i to
expenditure of public money. This is
nie
the
zawsze
dimension that
także
I would like
postulat
to
czasami znajduje
underscore.
na to do
It
końca
would be
dobre
my
odpowiedzi,
plea,
ale
actually, my big
postulat,
ask
że
to all of you.
wydaje nam się, że trochę wszystkim nam
It
brakuje
seems to
takiej
us
właśnie
that what we are
edukacji
all
i
missing
takiej
is
rozwiniętej komunikacji, bym
education,
powiedział, obywatelskiej
fully
wokół
fledged civic communication
tematu zamówień publicznych.
related to
I
public
druga rzecz,
procurement
o
procedures.
której tu chciałem powiedzieć, tu też pani wójt o tym mówiła i
Secondly, and again, I
Marcin
will
o
echo the
o tym
words of
wspominał,
Mayor
że
Kaźmierczak
właśnie,
and
mam wrażenie, że my po prostu trochę nie
Mahmoud.
jesteśmy
I
nauczeni
think that we haven't learned
takich
it
działań.
yet. We haven't learned to operate like that yet. I started dreaming that in some time Polish schools might come back to teaching students the basics of economics. Perhaps that's what we should be doing, teaching people how to manage their finances, what free market is, what does the budget of a state comprise, and so on and so forth. Perhaps we should include public procurement in that. Indeed, that is huge money. In Poland, we are talking over 200 million PLN annually that is going through the public procurement system. So we might teach people about the mechanism, make them aware of what public money is. And in that context, we might focus on public procurement. In Poland, over 40% of public procurement is implemented through local authorities. Out of the 40%, if my memory doesn't fail me, over 75%, over 3/4 are tenders on the level of communes. Can you get closer to that? It's as close as it gets to your local experience. If you want to engage people, make them interested in public procurement, I think you need to make the best use of the instruments that we have, be them pacts, activities carried out by local councillors, mayors, local organizations. Such actions should be targeted at people who are already aware of what is happening, who are adult. But, and this will be my suggestion, perhaps we should do some grassroots work. The public procurement system will not disappear from our reality in the years to come. It is here to stay for many decades. There is no better way to spend public money. If people know what public procurement system is, how it impacts their lives, the general condition will improve. Right now, the knowledge level is very low. Back when we started the project, the conditions and the needs were slightly different. We played an expert role in the past in the field of public procurement, even before the Integrity Pact was born. However, let me frankly say that when we entered the project, it wasn't that we had a 100% understanding on all sides why we are doing that. Very often, even within the foundation, we had to explain to people why is it important in the context of good governance, open governance, fighting corruption. These topics are much better rooted in the mentalities of our member. We had to somehow explain it to ourselves why public procurement matters in that broader context. What is missing, in my opinion, is a, say, human narrative about the topic. And it is of paramount importance. To come back to your question, Marcin, that you asked me, I'd like to say that in the Polish context, this was a pilot program, and let me underscore the word pilot. It was an absolute pilot program. Irina, perhaps you will correct me if I'm wrong. In Romania, there were some experiments. I'm sure there had been some in Hungary, in Italy before. The pilot project is also being carried out there. There were some attempts in Bulgaria, some initial experience related to this tool. In Poland, this is an absolute novum. We never managed to do it, even though a long time ago there were some attempts to introduce that tool. If the tool was to take some real shape, if it was to be supported and implemented at a greater scale, then apart from projects which involve EU funds that might be included in Integrity Pact projects, perhaps there would be some institutions like the Ministry of Finance that would be interested in strengthening and enhancing public monitoring of public procurement. At the end of the day, however, if we are to scale it up, local authorities would be the right place to address. And if local authorities are the stakeholder, the formula that we have offered is not fully tailor-made to the needs of local authorities. I'm not saying it's good for nothing. Back when we started the pact in Poland, apart from general guidelines and a general manual how to do things, guidebook, there was very little information about how to organize the process, how to operate with practitioners, with lawyers, how to regulate it, should it be a contract or something else. There were many dilemmas that were solved thanks to the pilot project. Of course, they don't need to be replicated one-to-one on local level. However, they have to be simpler. No doubt about it. We already took some steps in that direction. Already at the stage of the pilot project, we were thinking about proposing a light version of the pact, so Integrity Pact Light, which would be addressed at local authorities dealing with smaller public procurement projects. Unfortunately, we didn't make it. The dynamism of events in our pilot project simply exceeded our expectations. However, at the foundation, there are other programs. The studio for local governments is a venue where we want to meet active local authorities, representatives, link them to CSOs, to NGOs, to communities, and work out together concepts that might improve the functioning of local self-governments and engage people. Frankly speaking, the idea of Integrity Pact was welcome among our befriended local government representatives. So perhaps, apart from that pilot project, the Integrity Pact Light will come into existence, perhaps under the wings of our foundation. However, I don't want to take any credit for that. The pact is an open tool. It's funded from public funds, and if there are any representatives of local governments listening to us right now, the money is up for grabs. What we've prepared is up for grabs. And you're free to take the tool and develop it locally, tailor it to your local needs. Don't wait for us, please. Much has been done. We have prepared a manual or handbook for social monitoring, describing all the practicalities. Even if you think about pure technicalities, there is some solid foundation that we've already constructed. To conclude, I had a similar attitude to other tools related to public procurement that we would develop in the past. The barometer of abuses and misappropriations in public procurement, which was a kind of generator for assessment of public procurement throughout the entire market. Such tools always made me think about local councillors. The council members would be the first group to be equipped with the knowledge and the skill to observe and monitor and oversee public procurement. Why local councillors? Well, the construct in Poland, at least, is typical Machiavellian, so the tri-division of power. Local councils, apart from passing acts of local law, they are expected to oversee the executive, and the executive is responsible for purchasing decisions, which include public procurement. I meet local councillors under other projects pursued by our foundation, and I frequently heard voices saying, oh yes, well, there are so many public procurement projects in our communes, we don't have the knowledge, we cannot get the information from administration bodies, we don't know how to monitor, how to oversee them. If councillors wanted to engage, they would be able to do the most in this respect. They are the conduit, the bridge between citizens who are not councillors and the executive on the communal level, which operates on a slightly different level. Being such a link, such a bridge, councillors could play a very important role if they learned to monitor, to oversee, use the tools, and mobilize their constituencies to scrutinize public procurement projects. In my view, it's very possible to have a light version of the Integrity Pact. The target group should be local councillors, but that doesn't mean that I'm forgetting other groups of citizens. Citizens are also CSOs, NGOs, other organizations, or people who are not affiliated with any organization, people who simply have a common denominator. For instance, they are impacted by a specific investment or purchase project. You don't necessarily need to be an association or organization. Let me come back to what was said by Mahmoud, and perhaps I will amplify it. You said that money is needed. Fair enough, I agree. In the pilot project, the situation of our foundation was really comfortable, and we had a pretty sum of money allocated for that pilot project. However, money is not everything, or money is not the primary thing. What matters is engagement. If the public procurement project is, because of its character, hard to monitor, like the one that we were working on, it was related to local infrastructure. And sometimes it was hard to get to the construction site itself, which was at times necessary. However, when there's will, when people are ready to sacrifice their time for monitoring, for oversight of this and that projects, much can be achieved even without investing huge money. And when it comes to local tenders, normally these are not huge projects. Normally these are projects related to supply and services. I spoke about the barometer of the risk of abuse and misappropriation. It's, say, half dead right now, but back in the days when it was fully alive, when we were carrying out analysis related to the risk of abuse and misappropriation under various tenders implemented in Poland, what we saw is that it's not the biggest infrastructural projects that are most susceptible to corruption, but small projects, supply of, say, office materials, stationery. Big money can leak in such small drops. Initially, you might say that it's a dripping stream here and there, But if you add those tiny projects on the scale of the entire country, then the risk magnifies. And monitoring small projects is not so absorbing, and perhaps it can spark engagement and can have an educational role. To conclude, let me ask a question to Rafael. Rafa, you come from Mexico. From what I know, in Mexico, it was possible to integrate integrity pacts into the law. From what I know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, in Mexico, it was possible to mobilize people to monitor and oversee public procurement. Could you give us a hint, piece of advice? You might have some insider knowledge related to the pact in Mexico. How did you make it? What is the regulation? What is the practice? What does it look like? How did you embed it in the law? I hope that this question is not too much of a burden for you, but we would like to hear from you, from your personal experience. Thank you very much, Grzegorz. More and more times, fewer and fewer minutes left. We have less than 30 minutes left. So in this round, please be shorter in your interventions. I did not interrupt you before. Now I will have no other option. So please stay within the limit of 5 minutes. And I will be adding some additional questions. So for you, you can try to answer them briefly, but you can also refer to what you said in the first round of interventions. And again, without further ado, Rafael, I wanted to start with you. So my first question will go to you. Apart from Grzegor's question, I wanted to come back to the following question. Transparency International Secretariat presents recommendations that the social observer should be present at every stage of the project, from preparation through tendering up to selection of the contractor, implementation, and sometimes warranty procedures. I think it's justified, but at the same time very ambitious in the light of what we said today about limited capabilities of citizens when it comes to going deep into public procurement. Perhaps that's too much. Perhaps we should offer something smaller, like Grzegorz was saying, a soft version. Perhaps it will not cover the entirety of the process, but will be more effective. It will be easier to mobilize people to do that. That's my question to you. And now over to you. Stay within 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, both Marcin and Grzegorz, for the questions. And I think both of them are very much on point. And I will refer to the Mexican experience in a bit. But I think there has been some sort of misconception about the Integrity Pact, and understand that it has, or it must covers all different stages of public contracting. And actually what experience shows us is that sometimes more targeted and specific and shorter Integrity Pacts can have a better effect. In Mexico, how the Integrity Pact became part of the regulation was actually a more shorter but still very powerful version of it, that it's only focusing on the pre-tendering to the contracting stage. So something that we have seen here in Integrity Pact's EU project is indeed that the capacities and of the organizations and experience is also very different, as well also the availability of resources. So taking these two factors into consideration, it is important actually to consider another alternative sometimes for Integrity Pacts. The Integrity Pact, it is indeed a great tool to monitor all stages of public contracting, but it is conditioned to having the right capability, the experience, and the resources that are necessary. So when these different factors are not well aligned, sometimes it is helpful to have a more targeted and specific Integrity Pact that still allow us to have an enhanced oversight and monitoring within the limits and capacities, and do not promise or involved in stages that will be more tricky to monitor and that actually might lead to some issues with the public perceptions. For example, what would happen when the monitor does not have enough resources to monitor a project that is far from where the monitor is, or or that it's too technical and requires a series of lab tests or reviews on a constant basis. Sometimes it's even better to keep the Integrity Pact limited to a very specific moment, which I would say runs from the pre-tendering to the contracting, and make sure that the contract is awarded on a competitive basis and according to the law. And then once the contract has been awarded, we can also discuss what are some of the other alternative or options that are available to monitor these a little bit more complex stages. So to wrap up, I would say that at least what we saw in Mexico when the Integrity Pact became part of the public contracting regulation was that making it more specific also allowed to broaden the scope of actors that were interested in doing it. So in Mexico, it's not only Transparency International chapter in the country who does the Integrity Pact, but also many more organizations and also different specialists that are registered in this national database of experts who can do public contracting monitoring, and that it's open to anyone that has the right credentials, both in terms of experience and independence, to do it. And they exclusively focus on monitoring the pre-tendering stage, reviewing all the documents, making sure that they are in line with the national regulation, that they are addressing the needs that are identified according to what the market can offer, and then they review that the whole process happens exclusive as it is indicated in the law, that the tender is published on time, that there is enough time to gather the clarifications or the questions from the different or the potential bidders, that the bids are received on time, that they are assessed as the tender specifies, and then that the decision of who to award the contract is in line with the whole regulation and the criteria that has been set up, and that the contract ends up being awarded to the most adequate bidder of all. And then after that, the contract is signed, then the work of the Integrity Pact or the monitor ends there, but also other opportunities for monitoring the implementation are considered. But I would also be in favor of a more, I wouldn't say softer, because I think it's still very powerful, but I would say a simplified and more targeted version of the Integrity Pact that allows to put emphasis on the most critical moments of the contracting procedure.
Thank you very much for being so disciplined with time. And now let me move on to Madam Mayor. In the light of what we said in this panel, if you were to choose one or more public procurement projects for your commune to be included in Integrity Pact, what kind of projects would that be? Rather construction works that you mentioned? You said that Poraj was a big construction site, and citizens would be very much interested in that aspect, or perhaps services, or there is no room, there is no place for such initiatives in your commune at all? Give us a brief answer, please.
Biorąc pod uwagę zainteresowanie
bearing in mind
przez wspomniane przeze mnie
the interest expressed in social media, as I mentioned, interest in what was happening in our commune, I think
I tutaj takimi najbardziej
These would
drażliwymi,
be
wrażliwymi
investments.
tematami
I would
są,
say that
jak
the
w każdym
most sensitive
samorządzie, drogi.
topics, like everywhere,
W
include
naszym przypadku
roads.
również inwestycje
In our
wodno-kanalizacyjne, ze
case,
szczególnym
it will also
naciskiem na
be
kanalizacyjne, ponieważ
sewage
ciąg
and
rzeczy jest
water
w dużej części
networks. In
otwarty
our
temat.
particular case, sewage is an even more
No,
sensitive
ten
topic.
wybór wynika z tego, jak monitorowane są te
My
inwestycje
selection
i jakie one
is based on
wzbudzają
how such investments
kontrowersje.
are monitored and
Więc
how
myślę, że
controversial there are.
już na wstępie dobrze by było,
On the very onset, it would
dobrze by
be
było, jeżeli się uda, jeżeli będą chętni, jeżeli będą
good
zainteresowani, żeby na tym
to have
etapie
people
włączyć się
interested to engage from
całą
the very beginning,
procedurę, w planowanie
to
tej
become
inwestycji,
in the
no
planning
jakby pod
process of the
szyldem
investment
tej kontroli zewnętrznej, tego paktu uczciwości,
under the umbrella
to
of
myślę, że
Integrity
byłoby
Pact.
dobrze i to tak naprawdę,
Having such oversight from
tak
the
sobie
very
pomyślałam,
beginning would
słuchając wszystkich
be really
prelegentów,
good. When I was listening to all
ma
of
jeden
the
podstawowy
panelists,
walor dla
I
samorządowców.
realized that there is a
To powoduje
huge advantage for local
zbudowanie jakby na
authorities
nowo
stemming
tego
from it.
zaufania społecznego,
We
którego nam
are
na co dzień
building
po prostu
social
brakuje,
trust anew.
bo wiele
Very
naszych
often,
działań jest
it is
traktowanych
missing.
no podejrzliwie, tak?
Our
Więc już
activities
na dzień
are
dobry
looked at
mielibyśmy
with
jakiś
suspicion.
zbudowany
Such an approach would mean that
przynajmniej
from day
szczątkowy
one,
kapitał,
we would have
na którym
some
no
even
rzeczywiście
tiny
można
social
działać,
capital,
bo
and that could
taki
be
brak zaufania
something to treat as
no ciągle się
as a
jednak
basis. Mistrust
budzi w naszych
is
mieszkańcach.
omnipresent.
Jest no może nie paraliżujący, ale
It's not
tworzy
perhaps
taką
paralyzing, but it
potężną barierę,
creates
jeśli chodzi o te nasze działania.
a huge barrier for our operations.
Co? Przechodzę teraz do Iriny.
Now let me move on to Irina.
Tutaj chciałbym, żebyś trochę więcej powiedział, oczywiście też odnosząc
Well,
się
could
do
you
tego, co
tell
padło
us
już.
more in the context of the interventions of other panelists about the most important barriers that you had to struggle with in Romania,
no, zainteresować tym projektem
how to make people interested in the
obywateli
project,
czy opinię publiczną i
how to
podejmując
engage
działania
public
właśnie na rzecz
opinion,
zwiększenia obywatelskiego zaangażowania.
how to
Czy to jest
enhance
faktycznie
social
tak,
engagement.
że na przykładzie Rumunii przydałyby się jakieś rozwiązania prawne, które
Looking from the Romanian perspective, would you say that some legal solutions could come in handy to facilitate such monitoring,
wzmocniły w roli tego obserwatora
to
społecznego?
strengthen
Czy to
your
są
role
też
of
inne rzeczy, które
social
moglibyśmy po
observer?
prostu
Or
zaproponować na
perhaps there are
przyszłość,
other
jakieś
elements that
takie
you
wnioski
could
leżące
suggest
z
for
tego
the future,
pilotażu,
some lessons learned from your pilot
no,
project,
byłyby jakąś taką receptą na te bariery,
something that could be
z którymi się
a
zetknęliście. Także proszę cię
remedy for the
o
barriers that you struggled with. Over to you.
Thank you for the question. I think there are two aspects that need to be taken into account. First, the legal remedies, I think they would help to build trust from public contractors towards civil society in the monitoring process. And from this point of view, we think in Romania that if we are careful on how we regulate integrity pacts, regulating integrity pacts can be a good idea. On the other hand, I think this will not solve challenges related to public engagement. The challenges we had related to public engagement are related to two aspects that are, I think, the most important in our case. The visibility of projects. We monitored service projects, not constructions, infrastructure projects, and we believe, looking at the experience of other partners in Europe as well, that monitoring or motivating citizens to be engaged in projects that they can see, actually it's a bit easier than involving them in projects that they cannot see. And this it's also related to how they see the progress in implementing a project. And the other thing that law will not solve, and it's particular to this period, it's the COVID pandemic. We had challenges in organizing events and meetings with local communities for the land registration project. because of the pandemic. We planned for 2020 a lot of things that we could not actually implement because of the pandemic, and this is something that it's way beyond our control, and somehow needs to be taken into account for the future, for plans B and C and so on, for how to organize citizens' engagement in this unforeseeable events. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję, Irina.
Thank you so much, Irina. And now I would move on to Grzegorz. And my question to you, Grzegorz, is whom would you see as future observers of Integrity Pacts? We are talking about informal groups, social organizations. However, proposals are also voiced that perhaps the task of monitoring is so demanding that we should engage universities and higher education institutions or commercial companies that could do some tasks. Do you think the future will evolve in that direction? Should it go in that direction? Should we increase the group of potential observers to include somebody else than just social organizations? Is that a chance or rather a threat? Perhaps that will mean that the role of the civic element will decrease in such projects. Over to you. Well, I was trying to waive my 5 minutes and give it to others, but now that you've asked me personally, I'll try to be brief. My answer will be, it depends on the scale, the type of public procurement. If we wanted to repeat a relatively big infrastructural investment like the one that we were monitoring in Poland, it might be a bigger challenge. In our case, we involved engineers, lawyers, etc., etc. If we wanted to observe it and monitor it from A to Z, then it would be necessary to expand the scope, to go beyond solely civic society organizations. It couldn't just be some kind of bottom-up civic movement. It would have to be some organization, and participation of commercial entities would be necessary. Throughout the history of Integrity Pacts, to the best of my knowledge, in Latvia, even before we started our project, the Latvian National Library was included in the pact. Transparency International from Latvia created a consortium with a consulting company to carry out the monitoring and supervision, so that would not be a precedent. However, if that was to take some more rigid regulated form, then I think there should be an act specifying it, and it should be required that if we allow commercial entities in, these should be consortia between such a commercial entity and a CSO or an experts group, a higher education institution. In practice, I would echo the words of Rafa. With big tenders, you either have to focus on some sensitive points. Doing monitoring for 6 or more years of an investment implementation is a huge undertaking. Some of us don't even spend that much time working for one organization, not to mention one project. It seems to me that we have to look at soft points, weak points, sensitive points, and for me, a super sensitive point is the beginning of the investment. For me, the beginning is not the beginning of the tendering process, but the beginning of the planning of such an investment. If we don't engage, if we don't oversee the process from the first step, then it's only going to be difficult and more difficult later on. I think the story of Poraj could be a proof of that. Perhaps Madam Mayor will comment on that. I think that if we were able to mobilize and engage people at an earlier stage, at the stage of feasibility study, if there were some incentives to engage from the investor, from the local community, local authorities, that would help us a lot. I know that you were not a mayor back then, but if local authorities have in their backyard an investment that they cannot fully control, they should pay special attention to engaging, mobilizing local communities to oversee that investment. People usually don't care about things that are happening outside of their backyards. They follow the not in my backyard approach. If I were therefore to say something general about integrity pacts, not only the ones that are local, I would focus on the very beginning. What is happening at the beginning, what is planned to be implemented. On that stage, you can prevent things going south, and B, if you mobilize people at the first stage, then they are more willing to continue their engagement throughout the implementation phase. And to summarize, I do see some room for commercial entities, however, operating hand in hand with non-commercial entities. Otherwise, we will just have yet another auditing product, and it will soon be over-commercialized, and that's not the point in pacts, is it? Thank you, Grzegorz. I left you, Mahmoud, on purpose to be the last person to take the floor. Could you refer to what was said by your four speakers? Could you give us your perspective at what was said? Do you have any additional reflections in the light of what was mentioned by our panelists? And could you please give us a general overview? Integrity Pact Pilot, was that a success in terms of the degree to which we were able to engage citizens in our projects? I remember there were some hard discussions in the past. We didn't know how to approach it. We consulted you. It was hard to translate theory into practice sometimes. It was difficult to build the network of contacts that you mentioned. Indeed, that was a demanding exercise. What's your take on that? Did we pass the test? What else remains to be done? And what is your general opinion, assessment on whether it's worth developing integrity pacts and making them more open to citizens? Over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. My short answer to that, so this was a pilot, right? So a pilot aims at learning from it. And in terms of that, it was a big success in terms of what we have learned, what works and doesn't work. So I because this was a pilot, it was a success in this sense, right? So for many of the partners on the project, they had a lot of experience with good governance, with policy advice, and with working with governments. But this, for some of them, this was the first time to actually try and engage with citizens and communities and go to the field and try to do that. And I would say at the beginning there was this expert approach to that, right? So let's invite people to a meeting. They are going to show up, and then we have an agenda, and then we discuss, and that's it. It's a smooth process. It's a smooth process. I think one of the biggest learnings from the project is that this is not a meeting. It's a process, and it's a learning process on our side and on the people's side as well, right? So we not all people are active, right? So some of the people that we are trying to engage have already been engaged in other projects, but some of them, this would be the first time to actually um, uh, be engaged in monitoring how public expenses is spent, right? How taxpayers' money, how their own money is being channeled through public administration and spent. So I think it was a learning for us, and it was learning for people as well, and I think it was overall it was a very positive experience, and partners have been open to that learning pathway, I would say. Um, my second point that I would like to stress as well, um, my take on that when I compare citizen engagement in public contracting within the framework of an IP compared to other social accountability tools like the community scorecard that evaluates public services and aims to improve public services in cooperation with public authorities as well, or citizen report card. I would say citizen engagement in public contracting is much more complicated. So the other social accountability tools or the advice um, and the learnings based on other social accountability tools cannot be transferred easily because people have more stake in other contexts, right? So if you are offering people health services and you invite them to come and be engaged in improving these services, I think there is a um, there is something at stake here, um, um, more than when you invite them to come and invite them to engage in monitoring a public procurement process that at the end would lead to something that would benefit them, right? So it's a more of a long term or medium term benefit to them rather than the short term improvement of public services. So I think we need to take that into consideration as well, and it's also something that we need to, and we started in the project by documenting um, all of our experiences, and I think this provides a base on which we can build upon. So my last point, in order not to go beyond um, the five minutes limit. Um, and I would like to refer also to Gregor's point about the civic culture and civic education. And I think the experience of some partners working with high school students is also a promising experience, right? So it's not only about engaging adults, but trying at the same time to engage adults, but also um, to engage high school students or university students who will be adults and who will pay taxes and who will have more stake at the end. So if we can instill this sense and culture of citizen engagement in them from the very beginning, I think this would have a positive impact in the future of raising up active citizens who are willing to ask and monitor and engage with public authorities in public procurement, but also in other frontiers. So I stop here and thank you, Marcin, and everyone.
Dziękuję Ci, Mahmoud.
Thank you,
Konferencja dobiega
Mahmoud.
końca. Jeżeli ktoś chciałby
Our conference has come to an end.
ostatni głos,
If anybody wishes to have the
wypowiedź, teraz jest
last
ten czas. Jeżeli
word,
ktoś
now
chciałby
would be the
skomentować
time to raise
pomysł,
your
też może
hand.
chwilę
If you
pozwolić.
really feel that you need to comment somebody else's intervention, please don't hesitate to do so.
No tylko powiem,
Grzegorz
że przynajmniej
zachęca.
Marcina bardzo źle słyszałem, więc
Well, sometimes I didn't hear
Tak,
Marcin
mówiłem,
that
że
well.
jest czas teraz na skomentowanie. Jeszcze
Well, now is the time to
ostatni
have a
głos, jeżeli
final
ktoś, jakiś z
word.
panelistów chciałby
If
po
any of the
prostu jeszcze
panelists would like
dorzucić coś do
to
tego,
comment
co
on what
zostało
was
powiedziane, zostało powiedziane
being
bardzo
said,
dużo.
add a penny or two,
Jeszcze
even though
może
we've said
Marcin.
so much already, you can do it right now.
Nie widzę. W takim razie
I don't see any hands
pragnę
raised, therefore
naprawdę
I
gorąco
wish
podziękować.
to
To był dla mnie ogromny zaszczyt prowadzić ten panel.
say a big thank you to
Panu
all of you.
Wiktorowi,
It was a
Mahmoudowi,
true honor
Faragowi,
to be
pani
your
dr Irinie Lonean,
moderator. I would
pani
like to
wójt
thank
Katarzynie
all the
Kaźmierczak,
panelists,
Rafaelowi, García,
Mahmoud,
Acevesowi,
Farag, Rafael,
Stanisławowi
García,
Makowskiemu
Aceves,
za udział
Katarzyna
w
Kaźmierczak,
dzisiejszym panelu.
Irina,
Również dziękuję
Lonean,
za
and Grzegorz Makowski. I would also like
tłumaczenie pani Marci
to thank
Brudnej
the
i pani Zuzanny
interpreters,
Łopacińskiej.
Marta Brudne and Zuzanna
Jeżeli
Łopacińska.
ktoś
The interpreters are
spóźnił na
very
tę
thankful
transmisję,
for your
to
kind
nie musi się
attention.
obawiać.
If you were
Całe nagranie,
late
zarówno wersji polskiej, jak i
for
angielskiej,
our
będzie
event,
dostępne
don't
na
worry, we have a recording in
stronie
Polish and in English, which will be available
paktuczciwości.pl.
at our
Polecam tam
website,
zaglądać,
Pact
jeżeli są Państwo
Integrity
zainteresowani projektem.
Pact.pl.
Tam
Stay
również w
tuned
niedługim
if you're
czasie, mam
interested
nadzieję,
in
ukaże
our
się już
project.
końcowy raport z
I hope that soon
monitoringu
we will be able
wydany przez
to
Fundację
publish the
Batory,
final
gdzie
report
podsumowujemy
from monitoring
cały
published by
pilotaż
the
i programy
Batory
strategiczne
Foundation,
mierzyliśmy,
summarizing
cały dorobek
all the
tego
challenges that
dla nas
we were
5-letniego projektu
facing
jest tam
throughout the
zgromadzony.
5 years of our
Bardzo serdecznie
project.
zachęcam do zapoznania
And
się. Myślę, że tutaj nie popełnię
please,
dużego
I think
nadużycia,
that
jak
you will find
powiedzieli
it
tutaj wszyscy, jak
interesting
my tutaj siedzimy
read, and
w tych
I hope that
butykach,
it will not
przynajmniej
be an
kibicujemy temu, żeby
abuse
ta inicjatywa
if I say
14
that
rozwijała się, bo
we
dla
are
nas to jest
all
daleki
here
sukces
so much in
w życiu
favor of
publicznym
this initiative. We
naszych
hope that
społeczeństw,
it
naszych
will
państw.
become
I mam
a
nadzieję, że
constant
ten
element of
pilotaż, mimo
the
że mamy
civic
czas
life
na
of our
przekończenie
states,
podsumowania, jest
even
dopiero też
though we are
początkiem
summarizing the pilot
większych
project right
zmian na
now.
rzecz
I hope that this will
właśnie
be a
skuteczniejszej
first
i
step
bardziej odpowiedzialnej
into making
też kontroli zamówień publicznych. Bardzo, bardzo
control
dziękuję. Na
of
sam
public
koniec
order
już
more
znikniemy wszyscy. Zachęcam jeszcze
effective.
raz do
And
zapoznania
thank
się z
you
przesłaniem
very much
Komisji
once again.
Europejskiej. Przypomnę, Komisja Europejska
Please,
jest
it is my
pracodawcą
recommendation to
pilotażu Paktu
familiarize
Uczciwości
yourself
i też na sam
with
koniec
the
nagrała
documents
takie
published
przesłanie
by
do
the
wszystkich
European Commission.
uczestników
They
projektu,
recorded
także
a
zachęcam do
message
obejrzenia,
for
a ja
all
z mojej
project
strony bardzo,
participants.
bardzo dziękuję.
And
Do zobaczenia.
thank you very much indeed. We are in touch. Thank you for your kind attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have the great pleasure to participate and welcome you at this very important event, which marks the successful conclusion of your Integrity Pact Pilot project. A closing event for you and a first encounter for me, since I joined DG Regio as a Director for Administrative Capacity Building and Programs Implementation only this September. EU cohesion policy contributes significantly to public investment in Europe and in your country. We need to ensure that Member States make the best possible use of the EU funds and achieve the greatest possible impact on citizens' lives. To do that, we need strong public bodies and good administrative capacity, but also new ways of working by involving all the stakeholders and the civil society. And this is where the idea of the Integrity Pact is coming from. They aim to improve public procurement and to give civil society organizations a role to play in public decision-making. In 2016, together with Transparency International, we launched the Integrity Pacts pilot project. 18 Integrity Pacts were signed in 11 member states to monitor projects co-financed by the structural and cohesion funds. The Integrity Pacts focus on public procurement as it is of particular concern. It represents 14% of the EU GDP, and around 48% of the European structural and investment funds are spent through public procurement. Yet, in many countries across the EU, we see that citizens lack confidence in the quality and objectiveness of public investment. And this is why tackling fraud and corruption and ensuring efficient and transparent public procurement is so important. Close cooperation between the authorities and the civil society can be an important step in the right direction. And this is the idea and the primary goal of the Integrity Pacts. The overall pilot project of the Integrity Pacts is coming to an end. Most of the projects involved in the pilot are reaching a stage of maturity. We begin to have a clear view of the impact it had on the ground. The final report, lessons learned, and conclusions will be published soon. The Integrity Pacts have already been recognized and praised, and they even received the European Ombudsman Award for Good Administration in 2019. However, this task is by far not over, even more so today, when Europe and the world are facing the worst crisis in a long time. We are in a defining moment for both current and future investments. And we need all the tools that will support our recovery efforts. Integrity Pacts are one of these tools. The Commission will encourage and support the authorities of Member States to use Integrity Pacts in a more systematic fashion in the new programming period. Thank you for your attention and for being part of this project.